Hello, I am Kerry Bannigan, Executive Director of the Fashion Impact Fund and co-founder of the Conscious Fashion and Lifestyle Network. I am joined today by Andrea Jose, Peruvian Fine Jewelry and Creative Director and founder of Casa Collab, Rachel Sweeney, owner of Cox Power Jewelry and founding member of Fair Luxury, and Kyle Abram, brand catalyst at Reflective Jewelry. And we are going to discuss jewelry designers and retailers committed to clean supplies and partnerships for change. Welcome to each of you, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, Kerry.
Thank you.
A pleasure to be here.
Now, before we dive into the conversation, can you each please share where you are currently located and the regions that your work is focused on? Andrea?
I'm currently based in Lima, Peru, and my work is happening here around the country.
Fantastic. Rachel?
We're based in London, UK. We have one shop here where we design, make, and hopefully sell our work.
And Kyle?
So I work for Reflective Jewelry, which is a small artisan studio in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I'm actually remote. I live in New York City. And in terms of our gold sourcing, I recently traveled to the DRC, the Congo, to look at new gold sourcing from that area.
Excellent. Well, this is going to be a very interesting panel. So many perspectives, different regions. And so, Rachel, I'd like to start with you, please. Can you take us through the brand journey and the experience of sustainability in the sector today? Because the brand you are with has been around for some time and it is not new. And there's been so much that's gone on. So please take us through that.
Thank you. Yes, we have. Cox & Power has been in business for over 30 years. So we've always championed modern design, but been very much steeped in tradition and very much doing things the old way. So even though we've always sought to have a transparent business and have been aware of fair trade principles, at the same time, obviously it's been a long period of our history when we really weren't in a position to even consider transparent supply chains. And so for me, there's always been that kind of parallel of, on one hand, desiring to create beautiful things, but conscious of the dilemma, really, that there are so many negative issues around the extractive industries and the materials that we use, but also materials that we love. So when Fair Trade and Fair Mine Gold was launched, it was really quite an answer to prayer, really, and culmination of a dream. And in fact, it was a long-standing relationship with one of our suppliers, Viper Designs, Peter and David Crump, that kind of kick-started our journey into responsible sourcing and brought together the jewelry community that became Fair Luxury as well, because David Crump was absolutely core and instrumental to that. And I'd say here in the UK, over the past 5 years, there's definitely been a growth of awareness in general. I think the UK trade has a long way to go on many fronts, but there are a lot of positives. I think general public awareness is definitely greater. We know that the world can't go on the way it's been. And I think people are aware of that and addressing that in all facets of their lives, really. So there's a lot more openness, I think, from the trade and the public now to ethical approaches and practice than perhaps there has been, even sort of 7 or 8 years ago. So I think that's really positive. But to me, really, the thing that's really important personally is the fact that our jewelry communities have got an incredible openness and desire to work together for good. That's the thing that's really inspiring. Collaborating, getting involved in initiatives along the supply chain that in the past just wouldn't have been an option, really. Kyle's talked about the project in the DRC, and I think that's a really good example of that, where we can get involved as a retailer in a project that's going on in a mining community. And as an industry, if you take that kind of globally, we can really start to have an impact.
Thank you for that. And you touched on some key things there about the global that's going to lead to the transformational action we need to see in the sector. So very excited to dive into that later on. Now, Andrea, share with us about your mission to sustain the Peruvian goldsmith legacy and the ecosystems related to the jewelry practice. One moment, we actually can't hear you too well or at all on my end. No, I can't hear you. Can the other panelists hear anything? While Andrea's sorting that out, Kyle, I'm just going to jump to you if that's okay, and we'll return to Andrea in a moment. Please tell us about Reflective Jewelry as an activist company and the only fair trade gold jeweler in the US. Congratulations, first of all.
Thank you. Yeah, so Reflective Jewelry, as I said, is a small company co-owned by husband and wife team Mark Hoyt and Helen Chandler. They were founded in 1995 in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and Mark has been a pioneering ethical jewelry activist since the early 2000s. He actually worked with Greg Valerio to bring fair trade gold into the US. So in 2015, we became the first and still only certified fair trade gold jeweler in the US. We have our reasons for going with fair trade over fair mind, but the essential point is that these are both really great programs that do a lot of good for miners. I will keep this short, but Reflective has always kind of been an activist company. So sort of comes from who Mark and Helen are as people. Mark is a longtime Tibetan Buddhist since like the 80s. And he really brings those principles to his work, as does Helen. And I came to this company in 2017, specifically by looking for opportunities in responsible business. So it's really just kind of an inalienable part of who we are as a company. And beyond fair trade, we are always exploring new opportunities like this DRC project, for example.
Yeah, we're going to dive into that in a little bit. So thank you for sharing that. Now, Andrea, I want to try and bring you back into the conversation. No, I think we're struggling to hear. Whatever you did in the practice was fantastic because we could hear you a moment ago. Okay, what I'm going to do is continue on, and we will hope that Andrea can join us shortly because there's some fantastic things to be discussed here. So Rachel, I'm going to return to you. Now, implementing sustainable business practices can be extremely daunting for many people. Please share how you do responsible sourcing and how did you get there?
As I said earlier, we actually had a really easy path into it because when we first heard about certified gold becoming available, we did get quite excited. And it was a chance meeting with our friends at Viper and a conversation about the fact that they had just sourced some of the first fair trade and fair mine platinum to come through. And we were at the stage at that point of celebrating our 25th anniversary. And because we started as specialists in platinum jewelry, it just seemed like a really great match. And so we hurriedly arranged our certification and made a quick purchase of some of this platinum, which then took quite a few months to arrive. But because we had this lovely relationship with Viper, they really helped us to work our way through the process of certification. And also that relationship opened us up to the community of jewelers, mainly in the UK at this point, who were already working more responsibly, thinking about their materials, thinking about their practice, sourcing gemstones in a different way. And so, you know, it just became this wonderful kind of inspiring community that we became part of, where people were just desperate to share information, really keen to encourage each other on their journeys. And so that made it very easy for us to kind of make our first steps into a different way of working. And of course, as soon as you have like-minded people around you, then it's like a kind of firework goes off, and then all the other fireworks start going off, and you get inspired, you get stimulated. And even though it does take extra effort and it takes more work to work in a different way, on the other hand, you know, once you're on a roll, you just want to keep doing it. And there's always a new path, there's always something happening, there's always something developing. So I think as a community, really, we can support each other, you know, for people at the beginning of their journey, you know, budging up with people who are a bit further down the line perhaps, or if you've got a particular focus, connecting with someone who's got knowledge in that area is always going to help to move on. And certainly for us, that was how it worked.
And I like you know, it's true, without community collaboration, this just is not going to move along. And that brings me to my next question. Given its global reach, the jewelry sector is well positioned to collaborate and engage on the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, what is each of your view of jewelry as a force for good? Kyle, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think jewelry has a huge potential to be a force for good. Whether it's certified ASM Gold or programs like Moyo Gems or Columbia Gem House, we have some pretty clear evidence of that. And it's really about harnessing economic power for the good of people on the planet. What we must not do is deceive ourselves. There's a lot of talk, which is great, but at the end of the day, an extremely low percentage of miners have been benefiting from many of these programs that we put in place. I did some research about a year ago and found that in about 10 years of fair trade, fair mind, maybe 15,000 miners had benefited. And there's like, 40 million out there. So that's great for those people. I fully support fair trade and fair mind. They're amazing programs. But if you want to look at scalability, there might be alternatives that we need to consider. And I don't know, I think consumers are wising up and are demanding ethical jewelry. I think we're seeing that more and more. Exponentially has increased over the past year, especially on the heels of the BLM movement, and kind of tying that to social justice as well as environmental justice. And I mean, look, Brilliant Earth just went public, right? And I mean, without saying too much, I mean, maybe millennials will, I think people will eventually start to realize that, hey, maybe recycled gold isn't exactly what I thought it was or whatever. And then where are those customers going to go? They're going to go to leaders who have really put something strong in place and who can really back up their claims with hard evidence of benefit to producer communities. So I think it's a really smart business decision to get ahead of that curve. And I mean, on top of any kind of like just humanitarian aspects behind it, I think it's just a really smart move to start taking a hard look at your supply chains and start making adjustments. And once you can harness this money and give it back to these communities, there's no reason why miners need to live in like horrible poverty, right? So yeah, there's a huge potential there.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Andrea, I have my fingers crossed.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, brilliant.
Okay, great.
Okay, so
Awesome.
Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to welcome you into this question. I will re-say it if you need me to. And then I will return to your latter and bring Rachel back in. So I had just asked, I would love perspective from each of you here. I was just saying, given its global reach, the jewelry sector is well positioned to collaborate and engage on the Sustainable Development Goals. So what is your view of jewelry as a force for good?
So jewelry is a big industry worldwide, but moreover, what I see jewelry is an industry that can create a lot of added value. So for instance, in developing economies, such as the one where I live now in Peru, developing industries such as the jewelry one, where we can add a lot of value to the product, besides of just getting the gold and the materials from this country, can create a lot of positive impact. And actually, through collaboration, as we have been discussing, we can create and foster more of this added value, as for example, brands that can be committed working locally, which can generate employment and can sustain and promote the local crafts as well, which is a different type of industry, really linked to the jewelry industry as well as with the mining industry. And I think this is the way that we can create this kind of reciprocal approach of, we're also teaching through generating a bit more of industry in countries, in developing economies where we go and source our materials. And actually the impact can be enormous, and it's reciprocal. It's the value that you can get as a brand as well, of working locally and using collaboration to work together with craft communities can be enormous.
Okay, fantastic. Rachel, I'd love your perspective on this.
We're in a kind of privileged position, really, because as a retailer, we kind of have a public-facing, awareness-raising role in a way, an opportunity. So certainly in my community, it has been very much the jewelers who've been driving the agenda and trying to sort of pull our public with us. And I think probably for a lot of us, we'd say that's still the case, despite some developments and raised awareness. And so we have this opportunity to try and amplify the story, to make people aware that they have choices and that they can have an impact purely by their shopping habits in a way. I mean, it sounds so simple. But, as Kyle was saying, we have the two ends of the supply chain, if you like. We've got the extractive industries that engage such large numbers of people whose lives can be impacted for good or bad. And in many cases, where stewardship of the land itself can have a positive or negative impact. And that's before we even kind of start going into details. But just thinking about jewelry itself for a moment, as Andrea sort of pointed out in a way, jewelry's been with us since ancient times, and it's very easy sometimes to think of it as mere trinket, but all societies have and do place quite a high value on jewelry in one way or another. So, we know it has a massive emotional significance in all sorts of ways. It's not going away. And I think because of the significance that people do attach to jewelry, it kind of puts our industry in a unique position, because we have that, and then we have the combination of the will and desire of everybody here, I imagine, who wants to make jewelry a force for good. And by acting in the ways that we're seeking to do, it can be achieved, from small scale to large scale. So I think we're kind of in a very privileged position because we can effect change. And I think, when we look at the Sustainable Development Goals, it's a really helpful mechanism for sort of applying different facets of activity and just thinking about the really broad impact and the broad nature of impact that we can have.
Thank you so much. Now, if you don't all mind, I'm going to return to my first question to Andrea, where we had first lost her sound, and then we'll continue on. So, Andrea, share with us about your mission to sustain the Peruvian goldsmith legacy and the ecosystems related to the jewelry practice.
Well, yeah, very grateful that I recovered my audio. So my beginnings with jewelry were it started at a young age, as many other designers. But I think that the actual process of discovering my personal purpose has taken me years. And through traveling and working for mining companies in Peru, whilst also learning jewelry with craft communities, gave me this vision towards the connection that there is between gold and the land where it comes from. And this is how I started up 5 years ago, Casa Collab, which is a responsible jewelry studio that works in collaboration with local craft and mining communities in Peru. Casa Collab is a B Corp certified. We were pioneers in the jewelry industry in Latin America, and also, well, one of the first ones globally as well. And this means that we work with a social and environmental purpose. And we try to use business as a force for good. And through its work, Casa Collab has been engaged with NGO Pure Earth, which trains the miners to eliminate the use of mercury, which is very toxic for the communities and the families. So during these auctions that they organize yearly in New York, I was always trying to prepare and do the designs using the gold that Pure Earth rescues or from the gold that the miners, were trained in mercury-free mining practices in Peru. But then there was this actual problem in the Amazon rainforest, which is the issue of illegal mining. And this is how I decided to collaborate more in the field. And I also went to the Amazon rainforest and worked together with the first miner that Pure Earth has trained here in mercury-free mining practices. And we built this type of collaboration where the miner, Don Pedro, he would teach me a bit about mining, practices, mercury-free mining, and I would teach him a bit about jewelry. And this type of collaboration was really, really rich, really fruitful, because then he was able to understand the market where he could direct also his material. And thus, I have kind of built this partnership with this miner, and now there are more miners wanting to do the same in the Amazon rainforest, wanting to connect with the jewelry industry, with designers that, like us, we are trying to kind of source responsibly, that we really care about the environment, that we care about their families as well. So I do think that kind of this has become and decanted in the type of practice that I work as a designer, which is kind of a collaborative training, let's say, teaching each other and kind of connecting those links that in the jewelry value chain, at least here in Peru, were kind of disconnected.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm glad we could get you back into the conversation. So, Kyle, you had mentioned earlier on about the DRC and ASM Gold. Can you tell us a little bit more about your trip, the importance of this, and how this came about?
Yeah. In terms of how it came about, I don't know. I think it was just a fortuitous, happenstance. Mark had made some connection, and we felt really aligned with the people in charge of this program. And there came an opportunity for me to travel, and of course, I wanted to go, so I went. So I guess first, why ASM? I feel like that kind of opens up a whole thing of like ASM versus recycled that I don't really want to go into, but I will just say briefly that ASM has a lot of humanitarian and environmental impact. Recycled, it's very easy to pass off newly mined gold as recycled, but even if we're using post-consumer recycled gold, that's never going to stop small-scale miners from mining, right? So that's kind of the main idea, is that if people are going to be mining anyway, let's try to help them work themselves out of poverty and also not dump mercury into the earth. Those being the two main big goals. So here's a good illustration from my trip. I went to 2 mine sites while I was there. The first was extremely remote. I'm talking like crossed the Congo River on a barge, then took 5 hours in a 4-wheel drive vehicle. 4-wheel drive is absolutely required over like the worst dirt roads you can possibly imagine. And I say that as like someone who's from rural Pennsylvania. I've experienced other dirt roads, but these were crazy, right? And then another 3 hours on the back of a motorcycle when the Land Rover couldn't go any further. 3 hours just to go like 45 miles or so. So I'm just saying that because it's extremely remote. These are the conditions of this mine, right? And the whole surrounding agricultural community is like abhorrently impoverished, just like basically mud and brick shacks with like leaf roofs, like no electricity. Maybe once in a while somebody has a small solar panel for some lights. Certainly no clean water. It's just like, yeah, it's just pure agriculture. And then you get to the mine, and it's kind of like serving as the economic hub, sort of. Like, this actually becomes like a little bit of a city, and there's like tons of people working there. But this mine has only just they've been monitoring it for a little bit, but they haven't done any kind of capacity building or anything yet. So it's really just like what you would expect from like a raw ASM site in the middle of the Congo jungle, like lots of child labor, mercury use, like safety. I don't think there's any kind of safety. It is just like raw, right? But the thing is, I happen to know that over the past 18 months, this mine has produced about $15 million of gold. And contrasting that with the community and the way people are living. Oh my, sorry. Very important UPS package. So contrasting that with the image of the poverty, it's like, where did that $15 million go, right? So that is kind of what we're trying to do, is harness that wealth for the benefit of the community. So I went to a second mine that paints a pretty different picture. It was in a different province. It was a little bit less remote. And this one has been worked on for quite a while. So they have a lot of people on the ground monitoring. There are no kids working. There's some safety stuff implemented. I saw them mining without mercury with my own eyes. And they're working with several co-ops that will, through this project, collect 5% of the money and put that into community funds for projects such as I said, badly needed roads, healthcare, clean water, education for kids. Yeah, I don't know. I just feel like even from just those two brief experiences, you can really see some measurable impact from this program, and you can really see the potential of what properly harvesting the wealth of the land can do for the people. I don't think Sabu Safi programs like this are a replacement for Fair Trade or Fairmind. As I said, I'm a huge fan of those programs, but they are designed to work in circumstances where Fair Trade and Fairmind realistically could not happen, just because of capacity building costs and such. So really the core principle of Zahabu Safi is radical transparency, meaning just like an honesty that this gold source is not perfect, but we're working with the community, we're working with the people, or like, trying to work on mercury, work on child labor, work on better wages, work on community development, all these things. It's still mining. It's still not the prettiest picture, but it's the reality. It's working with people where they are so that they can be empowered to work themselves out of poverty. And one last thing about Sabu Safi is that name actually means clean gold in Swahili, but the official name is commercially viable conflict-free gold. And commercially viable is really kind of the thing underpinning the whole project, because that's certainly a criticism you could level at Fair Trade or Fairmind, that they are at 20% over spot that a lot of jewelers pay. Is hard to argue that that's commercially viable. Zahabu Safi is hoping to get gold out closer to like 6% over, which seems feasible from the numbers I have looked at. And I think there's a lot of potential for that kind of project to be scalable into the future.
Thank you so much for sharing this insight, where the reality is so many people don't get to go, and to be able to see such different situations that you just shared there as well, and what the possibility could be, and how we have to remember it's everybody in the value chain, everybody is a stakeholder, and that they need to be cared for, and their environment that they're in. So thank you so much for that. Now, there's going to be 2 questions left amongst us as a panelist, and then I will turn to the audience. So just as a reminder to anyone watching, please feel free to put your questions for the panelists in the Q&A, and we'll come back to them shortly. So this is a question for all of you. Sustainable Development Goal 17, Partnerships for the Goals, is a key goal for the 2030 agenda to be realized, and it's going to take very strong global partnerships and cooperation. Could each of you please share a collaboration that you are or have worked on as an example of driving positive change with partners? Andrea, I'll start with you.
So I think collaboration has been done at Casa Cola in the two sides. So the first side is, you see, with the mining communities, particularly there in the training, in the educational part. You know, when you go and travel and see what the miners are requiring, how can they, you know, supply better for you? How can they become more competitive? Even though they are small scale miners, like collaborating and reaching them and trying to build that partnership with them, it is really important. And also, the other part is building the partnership with other brands. As for example, now we are working together with Rachel Srini, with Cox and Power, in a collaboration, so to build their collections also with the gold that comes, you know, from the mines locally here in Peru. So we can start also collaborating with the craft communities here, and giving this added value that is important also to kind of contribute toward these local economies. And that's where the impact comes from, you know, when we generate employment, when we generate industry locally. Collaboration, you can see the fruits of those collaborations. And I think this would be the two sides of the way we are kind of approaching this goal 17.
Thank you. Rachel?
It's just so inspiring being on this panel. I mean, these two people, Kyle and Andrea, I've been kind of following the Zahab Safi project, just obviously kind of remotely from a distance, but trying to keep track of how things are developing. It's just incredible to hear, you know, the change that's happening on the ground. And I was really privileged to meet Andrea when she was studying in London. And when she came to visit recently, we just kind of thought, right, let's kick something off and start working together. You know, it was a conversation over a cup of coffee that suddenly turned into a project in about 5 minutes. And again, you know, originally kind of a fortuitous meeting. But for us, it's really wonderful to have the opportunity to kind of make that step from what we've always done in the past, which is making everything in-house and being very, very self-sufficient. I mean, obviously our materials aren't coming from in-house by any means, but certainly pretty much all of our activities have been done kind of within these four walls. To be able to then add to that the idea that we can do something which is taking the project right back down to the source, really, you know, to be working with jewelers in Peru with material that is coming from there. You know, it's obviously for us as a retailer and as a jeweler, it's a wonderful story, but the motivation behind it really is to be sending some of that wealth back down the chain, really, and to be able to support projects that are working without mercury is its own reward, of course. And just, I suppose, in another context, talking about partnerships, for me, getting involved in Fair Luxury is another example of just how meeting like-minded people enables things to happen. Our earliest project was one with the Goldsmith Centre in London, where we put on a conference, and that followed. We followed that up with a couple of other conferences and exhibitions. And again, each time the people we worked with were people who shared some of our passion, and wanted to just team up and do something that was going to amplify the message. And I suppose it's one of my real kind of core values in this business, is that it's actually the partnerships that you form, the relationships that you build, that can kind of make a thing grow much more quickly and be much more effective. So, you know, in my case, what I'm doing is much, much smaller, actually, of course, than what these guys are doing. But I'm well aware that actually with a small start, you can have a big impact when you partner up with people or organizations who, you know, share your passion, but also have resources, knowledge, maybe access to other people or other information, and together actually you can start to really make something happen that might start off as an idea, but actually become a reality quite quickly. And the other thing is, I think with smaller organizations, sometimes you can be more agile. You know, all you need to do is sit down with someone and say, let's do this, and something can happen, which is, you know, quite incredible when you think it might involve a jewelry supply chain that goes across the world, but it can still be done.
I love that. And I've just seen a great comment come in the audience from Stuart. We are greater than the sum of our parts. And it's so true. And I can see everyone nodding and smiling along. And so, Kyle?
Yeah. I mean, just to tag on to what Rachel said, I mean, Reflective is a very small company too. So we're just doing what we can out here. And, you know, this is a great opportunity being able to talk to so many great like-minded people here. I mean, that's really how we get things done, right? And yeah, I mean, in terms of the SDGs, I think establishing connections between jewelers and producer communities at the other end of our supply chain is just like really powerful. I mean, just simply from a human perspective, because there's so much disconnect in our lives in the West. Like I have all these things in my house and I don't really know like where they came from or who made them. But establishing that connection with partners at the other end of the supply chain is like a complete switch in perspective. And it's a really beautiful thing, especially for jewelry, right? Like I think that gives consumers a great story because you can point to a specific mine or maybe people and say, that's where your gold came from or your sapphire came from. And I mean, I take that to heart. I know where this gold and the stones in my ring came from. It's like, it's very important to me, obviously. I mean, I'm here, but I think it's important to a lot of people. And I think the more we talk about that, the more people will think about that too. So yeah, like I said, we're a small company. We're not changing the world on our own, but a lot of us can change the world together. We can change our supply chains together. I mean, personally, I'm involved with Ethical Metalsmiths, which is, I mean, just plug them briefly, like they're a great organization to meet other people. I'm serving on their action coalition right now, working on a consumer-facing certified ASM Gold campaign. Anyone could email me about that if they want to know more about that. But I mean, just anything about trying to get closer to the producer communities is just so important, I think.
Brilliant, thank you. Now, before we head to Q&A, do the three of you have any guidance or words of wisdom for the audience who want to commit to clean supply chains and or partnerships for change? Anything you wish you had known through your lessons learned, Rachel?
For me, it always comes back to don't be afraid to talk to people, don't be afraid to ask, connect up with organizations like Ethical Metalsmiths or Fair Luxury or any other communities that you're aware of, really. Because if the person you're speaking to doesn't know, there's going to be somebody somewhere who will be able to just help you on your journey. And also don't be afraid to make small steps. You know, we're still very much at the beginning of our journey and we're not afraid to say so. And I think anything that you personally feel is important, you know, wherever your kind of emphasis lies, then that's the place to start, really. You know, if you feel passionate about a particular area or a particular purpose, then that's where to start. And other things might come along that, you know, either grab your attention or that you suddenly feel a priority. But I think it's all about kind of trusting your instincts in a way. Start with the things that you know you want to work on, and don't be afraid to say that you haven't changed the world in the first 5 minutes.
Very good advice, especially for people panicking. It gets extremely overwhelming. Kyle? You're on mute.
Thank you. I think the best advice I could give is to, you know, look for opportunities and talk to people, talk to like-minded people. I mean, there's a lot of us out here. I mean, I know it feels small, but there are a lot of like people out there who care about the same things that we care about. And there's a lot of people here, there's a lot of people in organizations like Ethical Metalsmiths. Really just like asking questions from people who might have done this before is really helpful. Yeah, just talking and listening and looking for opportunities, really.
Thank you. Andrea, wise words to close us out before we go and see if there's any Q&A?
Great. I think Rachel mentioned, do not be afraid. And I think this is very important, because when you're collaborating, you're risking many things probably, and maybe just let yourself loose and lose that knot that you probably had there, and just take a risk. And I think when you take the risk, the results can be much better than what you think.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you to all three of you. So much insight and for your time. I'm just going to see here with the team if there is any questions from the audience. I know everyone's time is extremely valuable here. I'm just looking through the chat. Okay, great. Well, I think as well, Kyle, you had shared your email. So I think you're going to get some great connections there and questions. You have so much to share. So I think with that, when I am in London, may I call in? Oh, they are. Rachel? People want to check. Can we all swing by whenever we're in London?
Absolutely. Anytime. Anytime.
Tell everybody where you are again as a reminder.
So we're in Chiltern Street in Marylebone in London. And also just to say, I just think it's a great opportunity to, make connections and keep in touch as well. So if anybody does want to get in touch at any point, or has any questions, just do, please. The most inspiring thing is meeting people, finding out more, finding out what people are doing. And yes, please, if you're in town, come and see us. That would be great.
Oh, there you go. Christina's saying field trip. I'm in. So wherever you're going to go. Well, again, thank you to all three of you. Thank you to the audience for dialing in. And it has been wonderful to learn so much. And I know there's been great progress, but also we are aware there is so much to do. So thank you to you all, and enjoy the rest of the sessions.